Yes, yes. All right. So as Linda mentioned, or as Lauren mentioned earlier, actually, I'm Brayton Oski. I'm our communication director. Obviously, clearly fumbling my words as communication director. So apologies in advance. But tonight we are doing our design job hunting panel in a post-COVID world. And with that, I am going to also give a quick shout out again, as we mentioned, tonight's partner is the Creative Group. And for those of you that may not know, if you're an AIGA member, you do receive some discounts for hiring in freelancers and full-time employees. So you can go to their website down here, and you can also go to the event and click on the link in the event, and that will take you to their website as well. But you'll learn more about them here, as we have two awesome people from TCG here to represent the DFW part of TCG. And with that said, we're going to introduce our panelists. Unfortunately, Kristen was not able to join us. I got an email from her right before that she was unable to attend, but we have everybody else here. So I'm going to let everybody do a quick introduction, starting with Adam, to introduce a little bit about who you are, where you work at, and we'll go through the list here. Adam,
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Hey, everyone. I'm Adam Frey Pierce. I'm up in Seattle, or just north of Seattle. And day 79, I think, of being here at DocuSign and head of design ops role. So excited to talk about my perspective here.
Awesome. And then Mauricio, I'll let you go next here.
Sure. Hey guys, my name is Mauricio Kremer. I am a freelance creative director and also partnered in a couple CPG companies, but I'm excited to be here, talk about the job hunting process.
Elizabeth?
Hi there, I'm Elizabeth Bailey. I am the branch manager for the Creative Group in Dallas-Fort Worth. I've been on the team for 7 years, and prior to that, I worked at an ad agency in Addison called the Loomis Agency. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And last but not least, we have Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Ruprecht. I'm a senior creative recruiter at TCG Dallas, and I work with Elizabeth Bailey. And I specialize in recruiting digital marketing and creative talent. I've been there for about 4.5 years now.
Awesome, cool. Well, I'm going to turn off the screen share, and hopefully everybody can see the windows of the people that are here in the event. If you can't see everybody, just let us know in the chat. We'll make sure that's going. But tonight we're going to be talking about a couple of pretty key items throughout the job hunting process. We'll be opening up with building the resume in 2021. Then we'll go into building a portfolio, talk a little bit about that. Then we'll lean into then preparing for remote interview, and then mistakes job seekers make when applying for remote positions. And then we'll finish out with just a quick question around the room for the best advice that each panelist would give to increase chance of getting hired from their perspective. And we'll, throughout the event, as I mentioned, we will be allowing for questions to roll through. So if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A button at the bottom, and we will be sure to answer them at some point throughout the event. So without further ado, let's dive on into the building a resume in 2021. And this is something that, you know, everybody right now, whether you're just now graduating or you are looking for a new job, or maybe you got laid off during the pandemic, something of that nature may have happened. There's a lot of things that may or may not have changed throughout the period of time as we lead into this new normal that we're running into and experiencing. So the first question I want to ask everybody is, what are the key things that you would expect people to include on their resume, and what are things that you think they should stop including? And I want to open that up to actually Elizabeth, if you would like to take this one, to just share from your perspective within TCG about that topic.
Yeah, definitely. You know, there's some like little things that me as like a type A person that I think is like small details matter a lot. And I think, you know, I'll be honest, a lot of my clients, they've even mentioned things to me that I've thought, oh, wow, I never thought of that. Something that's simple that I ask my recruiters to do for me when I'm sharing resumes of candidates with my clients is just something as simple as making sure that like the title of your document has your name in it so that it's easy for a hiring manager, or maybe if you're working with a recruiter, to find it. I also am someone that thinks like a more simple resume goes a long way. Trying to basically figure out, you know, in a succinct way, describing your experience so that, you know, you get a little bit of information in there, but you you know, I personally think it's good to just have a little bit of info so that it kind of interests someone so that they can ask you to explain more. You know, if you can keep it to one page, I think that's somewhat of like an industry standard. You know, for people that have a lot of experience, you do have to get creative and really determine what's the most important piece. You know, depending on where you are in your career, where you put your, you know, education, whether that be at the top or the bottom, but really just thinking about the things that you really want to highlight, you know, whether it be, you know, an entry level position or, you know, a more experienced position, what matters the most for the people that you're going to be talking to for that position would be at least how I would start the conversation.
Awesome. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
To kind of add to that, one little thing that I always look for, make sure the candidates have on their resume is just like a very clear skills section, you know, whether that's software skills or more like, you know, marketing skills, whatever that looks like. But just making sure that's either like off to like the left or the right or the very top of your resume. So it's one of the first things that hiring managers, you know, catches their eyes, they're looking over it and everything.
I'll jump in and just add the resumes that catch my attention are the ones that exhibit the behaviors that I'm looking for out of a candidate. One of the biggest things right now for most designers is to just become a better like business leader, right? So measured outcomes, metrics, these things really pop out to me because that's going to be expected behavior once you're on the inside as a team member.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on like, I've seen a lot of resumes come through that have like, there's some people will have the let's say whether it be soft skills or hard skills, like a graph of like, here's the percentages of things that I've achieved, or they'll put maybe their image on there, or they'll put like a, you know, different items for like links and stuff like that. What, like, are any of those pieces of things, like, do you find them beneficial? Do you find them not to be beneficial? What are y'all's thoughts on that?
I've heard a lot of mixed, you know, mixed whatever, just like if people think it is a positive or a negative to have your photo on your resume. Personally, although I do think it's like a nice personal touch, knowing most people have LinkedIn, I think, you know, I know for me, when I'm hiring to my team, the first thing I do is go to check out someone's LinkedIn profile. Realistically, in my opinion, it's pretty similar to your resume, but I would save the space for more content on your resume other than just your photo. One thing that a creative director that I work with locally here in Dallas mentioned to me that I had never thought about was for designers specifically, or anyone that's going to include a portfolio link, making sure that it's an interactive PDF so that someone that's looking at your resume, if they're interested in looking at your PDF, allowing them to be able to click it directly from the resume rather than having to either type it in, or obviously if it's a Word document, copying it. But simple little things like that, I think, go a really long way.
Yeah, definitely. I just actually had a resume come through the other day that didn't have a clickable link, and there was a moment where I had some pause, and I was like, wait a minute, this should probably go somewhere. That's great. So that's a good lead into the next question that we have. So what are some red flags that you see that come through in resumes that are instant no's? I mean, I think the big one would definitely be grammar, but there's a lot of different things that could come into play with this. Mauricio, do you have any comments on that over your experience with looking through resumes over the years?
I mean, I think you touched on it, that grammar is important, spelling matters, have somebody proof it. You know, it's so important. If there's a misspelling in your resume, I mean, I think the whole panel can agree that that's a huge red flag. Guys, you have to pay attention to details. Details matter. So I think that's a big one. Sorry, my dog's playing with a squeaky toy over here.
Gotta love the dogs. They're the best. Yeah, anybody else? Elizabeth or Allison, you have anything to add to that?
I'm trying to think if I can think. Obviously, grammar is a big one. You know, I think for me too, every once in a while, we'll have a candidate send us a resume that's like 5 or 6 pages long. Kind of similar to what I think like email etiquette goes. That's just too much information. You know, even, you know, I think it's great that someone may have that much experience or that much that they want to share, but trying to condense it, you know, I think I have a graphic on my desktop too, that the average human attention span these days is 8 seconds. A goldfish has a 9-second attention span. So unfortunately, due to social media and the internet, humans' attention span has decreased significantly. So taking that into account when you're writing your resume and sending an email to someone too, right? Like focus on the most important pieces that are going to stand out. I think I've said that already, but you know, a 5 or 6 page resume, in my opinion, I'm like, wow, you're lucky if I get through the first full page, right? That just is too much.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to as far as the resume, it sort of depends. Different companies require different things. So some companies request a cover letter, some don't. You know, they're very specific about what they want. Pay attention to those details. And if it is a cover letter, you know, try to do a little research on the company and be specific about some things that you really like about them, instead of this bucket, you know, letter that you just sent everybody and you change the name at the top. I think, you know, be intentional about who you're trying to impress or who you're trying to attract.
Yeah, that's actually a good lead into one of the other questions that I was curious about is, you know, on the mention of the customization of the resume, you mentioned the cover letter. Is there anything else beyond just like, you know, customizing a cover letter that would be beneficial or add an additional bit of value to the hiring process from a hiring perspective that you've seen that other people do or that you recommend would be beneficial to just make you stand out a little bit more?
I think there's times where we've definitely, you know, talked with candidates about, you know, fine tuning their resume specifically for a position. I think you have to be careful with that, right? You know, you're not trying to fudge the information. It's more about, again, I'm going to say it again, making the right information that you want to really stand out. You know, depending on the type of position that you're interviewing for and specific skill sets that you can tell seem to be really important for a role, you want to make sure if you have that experience that you highlight it. And again, like make it so that they can see that you have the experience and share like with an ROI if you can, or some sort of statistic, what you're going to be able to bring to that position and stand out from others that may be applying.
And to add to that, you know, I wouldn't even like be hesitant about, as you're reaching out to that hiring manager, to include that ROI in your introduction as well. And then like and include it in your resume or your cover letter, whatever that looks like, just because I feel like you have like Elizabeth mentioned, you have a very short, quick attention span to catch their attention. So they might only open your resume for a couple of seconds, but they could see that in the email as well. So just include that as many times as you can to kind of put you ahead of the crowd.
There was a interesting question that came from the audience from Carmen that mentioned, if you've gone through a lot of different job changes over a period of time, how do you make your resume shorter? You know, like we're talking about like the 1 page and stuff like that without having any gaps in your employment. So what are your suggestions about the types of jobs and positions that you would suggest seeing in those places in that regard? Adam, any thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I had a barking dog right here. Called someone else to repeat the question because I was dealing with that for a second.
I can start.
Thanks.
I think there's a lot of interesting designs that can help with that. And so kind of checking out different ways you can format your resume could potentially help. You know, I do think, you know, if you do have a lot of experience, it is okay if you have a 2-page resume, right? Just being mindful about it. But, you know, some of the things that I've seen candidates do is almost kind of like a timeline and not even having a ton of detail for every single position, especially maybe it's just the top 2 or 3 that are the most relevant for the role that you're applying for or the most recent, putting the detail and the information, spending the effort there. And then for other positions, you know, making just those a line item would be a suggestion that I would have.
Yeah.
I'm not a panelist, but I'm going to hop in really quickly because this is one that my students struggle with all the time too. Especially I have older students that like come back to school for design degrees and then are like trying to accumulate all that experience. And I always tell them that in the creative industry, it's a particular challenge, right? Like everybody should have a resume that they're trying to make fit into 1 page to, as Elizabeth said, be respectful, right? But as a creative, it's a particular challenge. Like your job is visually communicating within a target area. And when you send me a resume that has so much excess, like if it's multiple pages and I actually decide to read them, then I will spend every moment questioning what words were unimportant, where you didn't maximize your space. And like, it's, you know, like you end up putting yourself in this scenario where as a communicator, you now have to defend that like your resume is you showing how you're able to sort through data hierarchy and lay it out in an efficient manner. So I think you really have to be careful there, because as much as you want to express about yourself, what does this person need to learn about you? And tailor it, man. Don't just have that 2-page resume. Like whatever one job you're applying for certainly doesn't need to know all of that experience. Cut to what's applicable to them.
I think too, to that point, like you could have, that leaves open also opportunities that can lead into the first, the second, and the third interviews to have more information to talk about. You know, these 4 jobs may have been in your resume, but you may have had this one experience at this position that was really, really valuable. Chances are they may not have read through the full resume, or if you have a 3-page resume, they may not have gone through all that. So that's information that you can bring into an actual interview and utilize that to not only sell yourself, but then, you know, talk about those experiences that you had. When usually when you're going through the resumes, you're going through a ton of resumes that you aren't going through super quick, or you're not spending a lot of time on each one, because you may have a couple hundred of them coming through. So I think that's definitely a key point. Anybody else have anything to add to that point there before we move on to the next question? Okay. I'm curious about, like, now with you know, there is, with social media and just how easy it is to, you get a resume, like if you have your name on the resume, the first thing that some people tend to do is go look the person up on the internet. So that introduces this form of bias into the industry. And I'm curious y'all's thoughts on ways that you or other people that you've seen have found ways to reduce the resume bias in going through candidates as they submit before they get into the interview process and things like that. Any comments there?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit here. I think just having the conversation makes everybody aware of it, right? So we'll come together and we'll, like, as a collective, there are certain tools that our recruiters have that I'm sure these 2 lovely ladies down here can probably talk about in more specifics. I know that toolbox exists, like there's some stuff for removing bias from the actual resume itself, but we'll basically just kind of come to the table and say, here's what we're looking for. And here's a lot of kind of what's already here on the team. So let's be really mindful of that. And let's also just make sure to ask like several questions to ourselves before entering into an interview session. And we find that exercise actually like just helps us be a little bit more present to make sure that like the invisible bias doesn't creep in. Cause like you said, we all have it, right? So that's just been a really helpful tactic for us.
Yeah, Elizabeth, Allison, have y'all experienced anything like that within, you know, just as you're peering through resumes, or just the different companies that y'all have worked with in the past, about thoughts that they have regarding
Sure.
the topic?
You know, it is interesting for us. One of the like founding principles or focuses for Robert Half is, you know, inclusion. You know, we are an equal employment, you know, partner. We cannot place any biases on anything, and we have to be very mindful from an ethics standpoint with our clients. You know, most of the time we do include names on resumes. I know that there are some like specific companies that we may work with when we're entering resumes into a portal. They can, you know, it dresses down a resume and it will just pull the pertinent information. Sometimes for designers that can be unfortunate because they've spent a lot of time making their resume look a certain way. And I've heard, you know, hiring managers say, like, make sure to email me the PDFs of what they have sent to. But, you know, I think it'll be something that I think we'll continue to see to change, because of, you know, focuses. You know, it's unfortunate that the other panel member wasn't able to join. I know she's done a lot of research on this. I was interested to hear that. And I know it's something that we're paying close attention to, and especially some of my agency partners are, you know, asking us to participate and like pay attention with for them. I think what Adam said is just, talking about it and being more aware makes it a very intentional part of the hiring process. And I think everyone has a lot to learn on that side.
Mauricio, I know you've not only with just your freelance creative work, but like you've started businesses, you've been partners of businesses in the past, like you have an extensive career in the design industry. Is there anything that you've put into practice or looked at over the course of your 20 years of design that you've found to be effective in that?
Well, I mean, I think, Adam touched on a good point, just having that conversation, being mindful of it. This is a topic or an area that is quickly evolving, day to day. And so I think just, again, being mindful about the fact that this is something that we need to be really conscious of and not necessarily careful, but sensitive to, right? We have to be able to have that sensitivity of, okay, we need to make sure and eliminate this piece of the hiring process based on whatever criteria, we're kind of talking about. So I think, I don't know that I have a specific answer, that there's no real silver bullet other than be conscious about it, be intentional about it, and just make sure that you are evolving as it evolves.
Awesome. So obviously this panel is a lot about job hunting during a post-COVID world, but I'm curious to field the question to everybody about, have your expectations changed around what a resume should look like? Or like there's a couple of comments that came in about like, what about, with a portfolio site, which we'll get into a little bit more later, but like PDF, website, different things like that, like how should it be presented when it comes to applying? And even more so, like there's so many people that are, applying online through whether it be Indeed or Career Builder, all the different websites that are out there, that all these things come through different pathways. Have your expectations changed at all because of the pandemic as you're gearing up into entering this new normal?
Yeah, if I could lead here with just a quick story of, I've had 2 roles here, 3 actually. I know Linda from this massive community that I'm really lucky to lead, which is called the Design Leadership Forum. So I've seen how a lot of other design leaders hire, and something across the board in terms of a theme that I had learned from them that did me great wonders when I was applying was highlighting your remote skills, right? Like a lot of companies are trying to still figure out, like, are we doing flex? Are we doing full remote? There's kind of this weird temporary world that we're all living in of like, I don't really know what work's really going to be like on the other side of this. And so what a lot of hiring managers have said, and this did, if we think about like ideally an outcome of this event is to empower somebody to convert from somebody who's looking into a full-time employee. As somebody who just did that, highlighting my remote skills elicited responses, and I tested it just in like some blind submissions. I found that when I was really pushing that I was working in an all remote company prior to the pandemic, that I was getting more responses. I would guess that that's not isolated to just me. I am just a data point of 1, but I would like to throw that out there of like, the more that you can showcase that you have skills and a way of thinking and that you can collaborate from the screen, that's I would say going to serve you very well. But that's just my perspective.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything to add to that, or any additional insight that they've seen through the changes with the pandemic? Yeah.
I think that's a great point. I don't know if my like expectations from a resume perspective have changed, but I think more and more soft skills continue to be a big focus for hiring managers outside of hard skills. And I think, I'll be honest, I haven't seen that on a resume, but I know it's definitely something that I would be interested in because our company is definitely moving to a more flexible way of working, way more than we ever would have been before. So that's definitely something that would be a big point of conversation for people when I'm talking to them. So I think that's a great tip, Adam.
Yeah.
Hey, Adam, just for the sake of some clarity, can you highlight a couple of those skills?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you found that brought you some success? I think that would be beneficial for the panel.
Yeah, so this was a little bit earlier, in the timeline, right? This is several months ago now when I was doing this, but at that time, there was still a whole lot of teams that were trying to figure out, like, how do we do stand-ups? How do we do kickoffs? Like, in terms of the overall product development flow, like, what are the rituals and how are we converting those? Are we rebuilding those from the ground up? Are we just like making small tweaks so that the screen is a little bit more friendly for the way that we work? And so some stories that have like really popped out for me is when somebody talks about, like, hey, I made this X change in terms of managing up or to the side or with my team. That really stands out to me because not only does it say like, hey, this person can deal with change, right? And that they have found a way to more or less like make sense out of a pretty difficult time over this last year. It also tells me that like they're a strategic thinker and that they can adapt really, really well. Like, none of us know what's going to happen, throughout the rest of the pandemic or if something else is going to crop up. Those skills and that flexibility is incredibly appealing for a team member. So however it makes sense for whoever's applying for what, I would just encourage you, in the very least, highlight those keywords in your resume, because that is one of the filters that is it's a reality, right? Like there are resume finders out there. So if you want to pop up, highlight your remote collaboration. And then also when you prepare your stories, and I know this is where I'm jumping ahead a little bit, Brett, but in terms of preparing for the interview, I would have stories that have like baked in as to how you have thrived in this time, and highlight those, because that's certainly gonna pop out for us, because we have flex remote, we have flex workers, we have remote workers, and then we have a few people going to the office, but most folks are going to have to work from their home offices for a very long time. So we want to make sure that whoever we're hiring and investing in knows how to do that really well.
Yeah, I think that's huge, man, because the reality is, you're right. I think there will be some sort of hybrid model pretty much from here on out. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see how all these companies respond. As a freelancer, I don't, I can I work with some of these companies that are testing the waters as far as like full back in house versus some sort of a mix. But you're absolutely right as far as being able to pivot and think on your feet, do that kind of stuff. It's good.
Awesome. Well, that's a good segue into our next topic, which is about building the flexible and quality portfolio. So we were talking about, some people are coming back in office, more people are people are still working from home very regularly, and there's probably going to be a future of a hybrid. So I'm curious to know, with interviews happening in person, online, things that you don't really know until you ask and find out, how should candidates how should they prepare to make sure they have every instance covered? What are some tips that you have for that? And then I'm going to turn that over to probably Elizabeth or Allison, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say just being as flexible as possible when it goes into preparing for the interview and everything. I just feel like when it comes to technology and relying on that, a lot more can go wrong versus, showing up in person and everything. So making sure, you test out your equipment first, making sure that, you test that you have a good background, check the username, everything like that. So I just say make sure that you go into it being super flexible, and also be prepared that with a video virtual interview that it's a lot more likely that another hiring manager will jump in and join that meeting. So try to, ask those questions ahead of time of who's going to potentially be on the meeting, so you're not surprised if it quickly turns into from like a one-on-one interview to more of like a panel situation, just to, try to be prepared for that. So it kind of goes back to just being as flexible as possible, because I just feel like there's a lot more variables when it comes to the remote interviews and everything.
I also think it's important to say, something that I've seen change from in-person interviews versus video interviews is it's still an interview, right? There are times when I feel like people, don't take it maybe as seriously and don't show up, or at least I hope they would show up maybe a little bit differently if it was in person. Just because someone's able to schedule something with you within an hour or two doesn't mean that they're not taking it seriously, or that, the way that you show up isn't gonna, reflect on, you. So I think, like Allison said, making sure that there's a good background, you're not somewhere that's too noisy. I personally think it's you know, it would be more appropriate to be sitting in your kitchen versus like in your bed, right? Making sure that, you know, take a look at what's behind your screen before you get on the camera to just make sure that those little things are taken care of. You know, I don't know if it's like now, but like funny stories. We had a candidate get on a Zoom interview and their title or like name was something inappropriate. They must have been on a meeting with friends. Luckily, we caught it before the client joined, but there's all sorts of little things that can happen, right? Making sure that you have those things buttoned up and take it seriously. Video interviews are just as important. And I don't think that they're going away. It's so convenient to be able to connect with people quickly, but at the end of the day, it's still an interview.
Yeah, and I would say this is a bit anecdotal, but get familiar with the camera. Get comfortable with that camera. Not all of us are, you know, I think we're all adjusting to this kind of like digital life now, but it should be, you know, very similar as far as eye contact and being engaging and having them read your body language and personality. Just get familiar, practice, get familiar with the camera.
Yeah, that's good. So the broadly speaking, looking at just your portfolio generally, whether it be in PDF form or things of that nature. And actually, one of the questions I'd like to ask you guys is, when it comes to building your portfolio, do you expect everybody from a design perspective to have both a website and a PDF or whatever the deliverable might be, or do you think it's okay with not having a website, or where do you all fall in line with that? I'm curious, Mauricio, Adam, if you have any thoughts on that from.
Yeah, it is so hard to be a creative looking for a job. You just have to do so much, don't you? It is just so much. I think if I'm being real, just addressing how competitive the landscape is, right? Like I think that's the question, is like, how competitive is this industry really? And your answer is right there. So I'm gonna guess like somebody that can take me there to the end product as much as possible is, I'm just going to have a better understanding as to, you know, what they did. And then when we work backwards to figure out like what decisions and why, and can they articulate those decisions and defend them and really take me through their thinking, it's just going to be a lot easier with like a real thing. That said, you know, I don't know, a story is also, I'm a sucker for stories. So, a PDF can certainly do the job. But again, I kind of go back to that initial question of like, how competitive is the landscape really? And what are you going to do to stand out? Well, a finished product is probably the way to go.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it's, damn, what a time to be alive, right? As far as like all the tools that a designer can leverage. Guys, I started in 1999 when you actually had to build a book, get the things printed. You know, it like, there's all kinds of pressure to have this very unique book. You guys, I mean, the fact that you can leverage the web the way you can leverage it now is unbelievable. So I would say a minimum requirement is, let's get a portfolio site up. You know, some cool additions would be a Dribble page, or, you know, a Behance, or any of these other tools that you can have. I agree with Adam that a story can do it, that can really achieve it. But man, I just think it's too, you've got too many tools at your disposal to not use them. So I would say, you know, tailor content for Instagram. If you are savvy, do some TikTok videos. Like I say, leverage it all if you can. But, you know, to his point earlier, it's like, you have to do a lot, but I think in order to get the job, the dream job that you're looking for, you know, that really sort of shows how hungry you are for this particular position or job.
Something that we've had candidates do outside of just like a website portfolio too is create case studies. And I think that kind of ties into what Adam and Mauricio said about having a story and maybe elaborating additionally on a favorite piece of your work. I think that's, I mean, I don't interview designers to my team personally, but I feel like that's a pretty common question to ask, especially when you're looking at a lot of work, is to say, tell me about one of your favorite projects, or, you know, something that you've created, and, you know, having additional information and being able to show someone that you've put extra effort into building a case study or really elaborating on it can go a long way.
Yeah, I completely agree with this. I think that, it's going to be different for the student versus the working professional as far as the case study goes, because and traditionally a case study is like, this is the challenge, this was the charge, these are the solutions, right? I think for students, the case study could look more like bringing me along the process of how you got to this final product. So initial sketches all the way to like client presentation, the chosen final product, et cetera. Something like that, that again, back to Adam's point, the story. Tell me the story around how that happened and how you got to that solution. But having those included with some form of variety would be huge.
And I think it gives you, to kind of like add to that, Mauricio, from the student's perspective, it really gives you an opportunity to talk about, if it was a team project, like what your role was in that. And maybe if there was a challenge with someone, you don't have to maybe put it in the case study if there was a challenge with a certain team member, but being able to share that story and, outside of your design experience, your writing experience, that gives you an entirely additional layer of experience to show a hiring manager, like, hey, I've worked in a team dynamic and like, here's some of the things that I encountered that I was able to work through. That's a totally different layer that you maybe wouldn't be able to showcase with just a website.
Yeah, if I could like plus 1,000 that, like that's the stuff, right? Like in huge teams, like
Agreed.
It's working with people is where all of the tension is, right? And so like showcase that. That's like the best thing that has been said so far, in my opinion, because that's the stuff. And it's also the thing that's really hard to say in a resume, or it doesn't really necessarily come up too often in an interview. Not that you should lead with like, here's how I deal with conflict resolution if no one asked, but if you can figure out a way to weave in like how you deal with adversity in general, whoa, you are standing out for sure. Yeah, just because we're always working with other people. So
yeah, that's a real good point. Because I feel like with the inclusion of Dribble and Behance and all these different things, I think especially with like Dribble is interesting to see their journey as it started as a way to show work in progress. And then it kind of evolved into, a lot of times it can double as like a portfolio showcase in a sense. So
it's become a recruitment tool too for a lot of hiring managers. I mean, they love looking at Dribble for potential candidates.
Yeah. So like on the note of that, like how do you, like if you're just going through looking at candidates and they've submitted their resume, they said their portfolio, like what are some ways that you found to kind of weed into, if somebody showcases something that they had an involvement on but may not have had a significant involvement on, but it's in their portfolio, like how can you like dig through that to make sure that what they're showcasing is 100% work that they worked on, and had like a heavy involvement? Or have you encountered that? Maybe not.
I would love to hear everyone else's perspective, but in my experience, it's super obvious. Like if you just asked a few key questions and there's some fumbling, it's like there's probably something that's hidden or they weren't as involved, and it's a bummer. But I'll usually just like, if I get that vibe, I just ask the question, and that's all I need is just the reaction.
I would second that. You just ask a couple questions about the projects in the portfolio and pretty quickly whether it was their work or not.
100% agree. I flat out ask, and if I get a sense that like, for example, if I see a huge difference between one project versus another, then I'll be like, okay, so explain to me what portion of this project, if any, were you involved in, or whatever. I directly ask like, what piece of it did they do? If they talk about collaboration specifically, then I want to know like, oh, you illustrated the little guy on the corner of the box. Well, okay, but Adam's right. I mean, I think it becomes pretty obvious.
Yeah. Have a couple of questions that have come through about like kind of protection of work, both one side from like protecting your own working case study so that's not like out there for the world to see, and as we mentioned, like somebody could take that and like, hey, this is mine, that aspect of it. And additionally, showcasing work that is under an NDA or maybe locked in some way. Like those two separate questions, but both around like security of your work. What are y'all's thoughts on that? Elizabeth, any thoughts there?
Sure. Two things that I've seen for portfolios specifically, and like I do not have a portfolio since I'm not a designer, but I've seen that a lot of candidates of ours will have certain work that will have a password for you to be able to see it. So a lot of times, based on who we're sharing the portfolio with, we'll give them access to or give them that password to be able to see it. So I'm sure that based off of like the different websites and tools there are, that's an option. For an NDA, I think the best way that we've worked with candidates who have that is setting up a meeting on Zoom or, Teams, and having them share their screen and go through the project live rather than sending the work. I think there's a lot, it's common, right, to have things under NDA. I think you just have to be prepared and have a good plan to show it. Again, it's another opportunity to kind of show a story, and as long as you're prepared and know how to show it. But I think the easiest way that I've dealt with it for clients and candidates that have had that type of work is allowing them control over the information and the content on a video. If someone's going to do something malicious or bad, it may be difficult to stop them, but I think that if you, set up a video call and you have control of the content, you should be safe with that.
Yeah, I would say too, I've been in this situation before, and I think that you can parse it out a little bit, right? So you have certain content on your website as opposed to in your physical portfolio that you show, excuse me, a hiring manager. And the way I dealt with that was just basically asking the client, look, I'm not making this public, but I would love to show it as a potential tool to get hired, using this work from a former client. And typically the client's going to be like, yeah, that's fine as long as you don't X, Y, and Z, right? So I think just sometimes all you have to do is ask the client. Sometimes it's, not worth it depending on who you're working with, but I think it's worth a shot.
Awesome. So one other question I want to ask is just like broadly speaking, like what do you consider would be, especially people that they've worked on some print, they've worked on some digital, and I think this kind of can even be a broader question, like should your portfolio encompass all of those pieces? And how many projects should you put in there? What formats? Like different those kinds of pieces. What do you look for to make a good, well-rounded portfolio?
It's the $1 million question, isn't it, Brett?
That is.
I think that so generally speaking, I would say if you have some experience in branding and packaging, you have a broad set of skills, go ahead and showcase those skills. I would say quality over quantity is really important here. So 6 to 12 really great, pieces that you can express rationale behind and defend why you made these creative decisions. But I think, there's a lot of opportunity to maybe, if you have some kind of like peripheral skills like motion graphics or video editing or, things like that, like you have a unique opportunity to showcase those as well, writing. So I would say a good variety of work would be awesome. I love what Allison said or Elizabeth said earlier about the case studies. I think that's a really great format even for a portfolio. So make sure that you're showing your personality and your skill set, but you're also being really intentional about what you're showing and how you can defend it as you're talking through it. And edit, make sure that you can get the best work in there. I think one more thing to add, and I'll stop rambling, but if it really depends on who you're trying to get hired by, right? I think that if you are interviewing with, you want to go in-house at Coca-Cola, for example, and all you have is brochure work in the medical industry, then I would say do a couple self-initiated projects of some packaging design for Coke, or, like make sure if you don't have the type of project that you think this hiring manager or this company is looking for, challenge yourself to do a couple of these projects to include in your portfolio to be able to really show them that you understand the type of role that you're stepping into potentially.
Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like a full-time job when you're looking for a job. You got, there's the social media side of it. There's just making sure that, you have your resume in a good spot. Portfolio is in a great place. And as we transition to the next topic, we have preparing for the interview. So gone through the resume, you've submitted that, you've submitted your portfolio. It was good enough to get that first interview set up. Here, everybody's getting prepared for that. What are some questions that you find candidates should be asking before they get into that first interview that they oftentimes may not ask enough of, whether it be remote or in person? Allison, you have anything for that?
Yeah, sure. So for me, especially with it being a remote position, I would say make sure you're asking like specific questions about like, hey, where is the team located? What is the overall schedule going to be look like? What are the time zones like and everything, and kind of asking that. And then kind of what I hinted at earlier, just be prepared to be as flexible as possible and ask those questions of, hey, who should I prepare to be speaking with on the interview and everything, and then be flexible if that is going to change at all or that type of thing.
Something else that to add to what Allison said is just asking, and I do this for hiring managers that I work with, what can we have these candidates be prepared to talk about? Is there something specific that you'd like them to highlight or showcase? Just asking that question could get you intel that you may not know, and you're just that much more prepared, right? I think being curious is a good thing. Ask those questions like, what can I do to be well prepared for this? And managers or whoever you're meeting with will be like, wow, they want to be prepared. And then that gives you, again, a leg up against whoever else may be interviewing for the same position.
What about when you're getting into just the etiquette of doing a remote interview? So some do's and don'ts, like especially with Zoom, I feel like it's very easy to get lost in, I left my background on, or my room's messy, or whatever it might be. What are some tips that you would have for making sure that you have all your ducks in a row before you get onto said remote interview that people may not be aware of?
I think gosh, I think it was Elizabeth earlier who just like rifled off a bunch of great things, like just awesome checklist. I think a general like guarding rule would for me is like, is there anything that I'd be embarrassed about? Like that's the question. Like, is there anything here that's going to make me look like a fool? Would my mother be proud of this session right now, or would she not? But like just having that kind of like that black or white question for me is kind of all you need. But I think the more checklist approach, I'm sure there's a lot of tactical things. What are the pollutions, noise pollution, light pollution? Are there any distractions? Is there anything at all that's going to get in the way between my message and the audience? And I also like to pepper in like as much interaction as I possibly can to make sure that that's not just a one-way street, right? A lot of things within our control, but there's also a lot of distractions on the other side of the screen. Everyone who's listening is probably multitasking right now. So I like to ask questions to like almost remove distraction on the other end of the communication as well. Just make sure that we get them engaged,
Yeah, that's good. So how has the interview process, if anything, changed with remote interviewing versus in person? I think definitely looking at the screen, the engagement, as Mauricio talked about earlier. But is there any other pieces that you feel you've seen a significant shift between the in-person versus now remote? And what are some strategies that you can provide for candidates looking to interview through the screen?
Sure. One thing that I think we've seen is the request of like, hey, are you ready to interview in like an hour or two? So very quick turnaround time versus, are you available tomorrow afternoon, that type of thing. So I would just encourage candidates that like, hey, if you can be prepared in an hour or two and you won't have any distractions around you and you have everything in check and you'll feel like you can put your best foot forward, go for it. But don't be hesitant to be like, hey, I won't be available in an hour or two, but I'm available anytime, and after 4 p.m. or tomorrow morning or whatever that looks like, show your interest in the position, but don't feel like you have to jump on a call in an hour or two if you don't feel like you'll be fully prepared. And because, what's the point? You won't be putting your best foot forward then.
I think that's a great point. And yes, I would say positive is that turnaround time. You can interview in a matter of an hour, but also negative, people could ask you to interview that quickly. And if, you're not going to be prepared, don't do it. I would say if you think you are, or it's smart to try to be prepared at any moment. For me, something that I always do is like, I have like a checklist of things that I do, as simple as like right now, my phone's upside down, just seeing that little notification, right? If a text message comes through, that distracts me. My second screen, I have all the windows closed, just to not have anything, like Adam was saying, like any sort of pollution outside of the meeting that I'm in. And just thinking about those things, almost creating a checklist for you for an interview will help you be able to maybe do something within an hour or two. But thinking about like all the things that you want to make sure you have ready to go if someone were to ask you to interview quickly. And something to kind of say back on our last topic is practice, right? Whether it's with a friend, maybe a member of your family, sometimes you don't realize that something's on your screen until you turn the camera on, or the angle is funny, or the lighting. Like I can see as it's getting darker outside, the lighting has already changed on my camera. So kind of practicing and just seeing what works and what doesn't, so that when you do have an interview, you're really prepared, and just that little piece of maybe being nervous about it isn't even in the back of your mind.
What about preparation? I'd like to talk about that a little bit of it. I mean, we've talked a little bit about that here already, but I mean, I'm actually kind of curious about the quick turn that you mentioned, Allison, about somebody calls you up an hour or two beforehand. Like, how often do you see that happen? And do you think that could potentially cause you losing an opportunity because you weren't available that quickly? And I mean, how much should people be prepared? Or, I mean, is it okay to just say, hey, like, I respect my time also, and I want to make sure that that's, kind of taken with the company that I'm applying for? And what are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, just because I feel like it can go either way. It's like it is a super, super competitive job market right now, especially with it being remote opportunities, because you're not just getting local talent, you're getting talent from all over applying, which means the caliber of talent is just going up. So I would say, in a way, I don't think you should go into an interview if you're not going to be prepared for it, just because I don't think you're going to do yourself justice, or anyone you're interviewing with, justice as well. But I mean, you are risking that, and Elizabeth might be able to speak to this a little bit more, because we are definitely losing candidates fast. But yeah, I would say you definitely, if you can make it happen and you're confident, I would say go for it, just because I've been speaking with candidates who, hey, they might not have had anything for a year or two, and they've been consistently interviewing and applying, and then a couple weeks ago they had like 3-4 offers like in 1 week, that type of thing. So it's definitely a super competitive market. So I would say, if you can go for it. Just make sure you're putting your best foot forward as you do it and everything there.
I would say it depends on what you're applying for, right? So Allison and I help clients in freelance projects, contract to hire, and then full-time opportunities too, right? So for us, from a freelance perspective, it is a daily occurrence that a client contacts me and says, I need someone to start this afternoon. Who do you have? And so then my first call is to Allison, and I say, call your best designers, get them on the phone. I need them right away, right? So from a freelance perspective, we do have to move extremely quickly. For clients that are hiring someone contract to hire or direct hire, I don't get those requests as often to interview within an hour, but it can happen. I had a client of mine that's local. It's a corporate client in Dallas. And he called me on Monday and said, I need to make a decision this week on a designer that I want to hire before the end of the week. And he emailed me on Wednesday and was like, I need to make a decision tomorrow. For me, that's a little bit of a red flag, right? That's fast. And not only for my client to make a decision, but for candidates, right? We don't ever want to put a candidate in a situation where they're having to make a decision that quickly, especially for a full-time position, right? I talked to a candidate today who had an opportunity in front of her, and the hiring manager was pressuring her to make a decision on the phone as they offered the opportunity for her. It was a full-time or a year-long contract, and she was in a full-time seat. And she luckily reached out to one of my recruiters to get advice. And our advice is like, if something doesn't feel right, don't feel forced into anything, especially if it's something long-term, that says a lot about maybe the culture or that company. There are a lot of open positions and a lot of clients are trying to hire quickly, but you need to do the right thing for you. And if someone's not going to respect your time and your decision-making process, that's something to take into account. I think it's respectful to make a decision within reason. But to do something and make a decision on a year-long contract within minutes of hearing about it, I felt like I couldn't make a decision that quickly, and I wouldn't think most people could. So considering things like that and not being afraid to, say, I'm going to need more time. And if they don't respect that, then maybe it's not the best opportunity.
Yeah. One of our audience questions was talking about just, working so long in remote, not ever seeing themselves going back to 9 to 5. We talked a lot earlier about kind of hybrid options and stuff like that, but I wanted to see if we can elaborate a little bit more on what any hybrid options look like. And more importantly, I'm kind of curious about, with us going remote and then everybody being in the pandemic and losing the in-office culture, and then now that we're getting away from that, what are, I guess, from an applicant's perspective, what are the best ways to ask about that? And how have you seen companies trying to maintain a culture if they're going for the hybrid of like in-office versus remote and those kinds of perspectives? Have you seen anything on that? I don't know, Adam, I'm curious to know your thoughts on that actually.
I'm just curious, like why is that question taboo? I would just ask directly. And if that is a taboo question, I'm not sure if I want to work for that place, but I guess that's a super privileged standpoint, right? Like I get it. If you're hungry, like, yeah, maybe don't ask the question, but I don't know. I'm genuinely confused. Can the rest of the panelists lean in here? Why would this be a dangerous question to ask directly about flex and remote policy?
I would say ask it. I don't think it's a dangerous question at all. I flat out just say, how's the company structured, post pandemic? Like, what are you guys' plans for the future, short to mid, long term, whatever? Because that's going to help you make a decision. And I think, there are situations, it depends on, are you a working professional and have some experience under your belt? Are you a student? But because if you're a student, then to me, it's like, if the right opportunity comes along, then you need to be hungry and hustle and get that opportunity. If you're a working professional and you've become a little bit more self-aware, then maybe it's not the right thing to do. But from a taboo standpoint, I don't see it as taboo at all. I think it's an important question.
I agree. And I was, while you guys were talking, I was pulling up an article, that the Dallas Business Journal posted, or just the Business Journal, and they took it away because I'm not like a paying member. But basically the premise was they surveyed over 3,000 people and asked them, would you rather have the opportunity to work from home, or we could give you an additional $30,000 raise? And like 75 to 85% of people chose working from home. So I thought that was so interesting, right? Based on, what makes sense for people. And now that a lot of people have proven that, hey, I can be successful and do my job from a remote perspective. It is challenging companies to figure out how they work that into their, work-life balance moving forward, because it is probably number one on most people's list, and that survey does a great job. I'll try to find the link or some information on it and follow up with Brett about it. But I don't think it's taboo. If it's important to you, then ask about it. But the fact that 75% of people chose being able to work remotely than getting $30,000, like, that's pretty significant.
I also just don't see how that's not like the most important question for everybody right now.
Sure.
What's everyone doing, right? I don't know. That's maybe I'm crazy.
I completely agree. I'm curious on the Elizabeth, you were talking earlier about how competitive it is. Both you and Allison were talking about the competitiveness of the market. Do you see that as an advantage more for applicants or hiring managers?
I would say that candidates are definitely at an advantage here.
Yeah.
I think there's like over 3 million more postings than there are available people for jobs in the US. I should have studied my statistics, but we get thrown a lot. So candidates are definitely at an advantage, but I think you have to be careful with that, right? You know, especially if you're in a situation where maybe you're looking to gain experience or grow in your career, you know, be open to opportunities and be flexible to an extent, right? Don't take something that you're not interested in, but you know, I see it on both sides. I see clients that are 100% back in the office, no question. They want someone on site full time, you know, and I just tell them, I appreciate that. I understand that that's your company's policy, but I want you to understand that that's going to significantly impact the amount of candidates that we have interested. You know, and I tell that to my recruiters too. We may have a candidate who's perfect for an opportunity with one of my clients, but they are looking for someone to go on site 2 days a week. And if a candidate's not willing to, you know, flex on that, you know, for me, of course, I'm like, man, I don't want them to pass up this opportunity. But again, you have to really take into account what's, you know, important to you. And again, where you are in your career maybe has an impact or has a, you know, dictates that. But candidates definitely have a leg up in quite a few scenarios right now.
I saw Mauricio come off, so I'll make this really brief and make space. But really quickly too, this has come up a few times. If I could just give a blind recommendation, like spend some time, if you haven't done this already, and figure out what your values are, right? Because it will just reduce a lot of hard decisions that you'll have to make, or at least they'll make them a little bit easier. Like, you know, what is your ideal situation? What are you willing to compromise on? And what are your no compromises? Of course, like money, the right company, certain things, they might change that for you, but it's a quick exercise just to go through and ask yourself a few questions of pretty much everything that we're bringing up right now. Because it makes tough decisions later a little bit easier. And to Allison and Elizabeth's points earlier, sometimes these are apparently really quick turnarounds on having to make the decision. So it might make it a little less stressful.
I agree. I think you kind of took the words out of my mouth. I was going to basically speak on self-awareness. Just get to know yourself, get to understand, you know, like what your deal breakers are, what your compromises will be. You know, I think it depends on the candidate. I mean, I have now been freelancing again for almost 4 years now, 3.5, something like that. But I miss that interaction, that collaboration with people, bouncing ideas off of, you know, I'm in a bubble by myself. So I can do both because I have done both in and out of agencies, but I miss that interaction with people. There's something about that culture aspect of it. So if you're the kind of person that craves that or needs that, or it energizes you, then use that as kind of like your lead, right? Your guide, your North Star. But if you don't mind working in a little bubble, you know, for days and days, and you don't need that collaboration piece, and make that known as well. I mean, I think self-awareness is a real key here.
There we go. Yep. Okay. So somebody asked the question just about having been out of work for a period of time and looking at, like, because they haven't had maybe just haven't, you know, been in the, I guess not the right tier per se. Like maybe a lot of places they've been looking at have been looking for entry level, or they're just, you know, whatever it might be, but haven't been employed in the area they want to work in, but are looking to get a job in a field for design, for example. What are some suggestions that you have for those individuals that are looking to get in this field, have been working on the side, but don't have any professional work per se in the last maybe 2 years at a career, to help them, you know, make sure that they're not skipped over because they haven't been working in it recently? Allison?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So one thing that I've seen candidates do that I really like for this is where they'll start their resume off with a relevant experience or like project experience or, you know, anything like that, where they can kind of highlight, you know, what the first thing that you want the hiring manager to see, you know, the most relevant thing, the project that they are trying to get, like, break into the field with and everything. And then under that, you can list, you know, additional experience. So you can show like, hey, you know, there's not a gap in your resume and you're still working to date and everything. It's just not not necessarily, you know, the first position that you went to showcase, that type of thing. So I would say that's probably the best way to go around that, but I'd love to hear what anyone else has to chime in as well.
I would say too, open to contract work, right? They could get, we would obviously be happy to help them, but you know, if they can get another project, if they've already got projects, like Allison said, highlighting those, although they might not be full-time positions, just again, telling that story with your resume, maybe in a little bit more creative way to highlight those things that are going to matter most for a full-time position or opportunity that they're interested in.
Yeah.
Something else, sorry, I just thought of this, that could be helpful is depending on who they worked on the project with. This is something that I do and ask clients that have worked with some of our candidates, is getting, you know, a little sentence or a blurb about the candidate's project, or, you know, how they were able to help their team, and including that either on their resume, or again, if they're able to put together a little case study. Even though it's not professional experience, doesn't mean that it doesn't carry weight. And adding little additional aspects of that, you know, and any sort of leverage you can get from a manager or whoever that was that you worked with to showcase, like, hey, they did a great job. They, you know, delivered the work ahead of schedule. Any sort of tidbit they can do to showcase the work that you did, you know, I think that could be a great way to kind of get or add weight to that project.
Yeah. If I could just quickly plus one, it's such an overlooked path for a lot of us. I know it was for like me and my friends a few years ago. This is a while ago, but like the contract option essentially wasn't one that we even considered. And it's such a no-brainer now. Like thinking back, I'm like, oh, Adam of the past, why wouldn't you consider this route? It's a great professional path to take long-term, even, is to, like, you know, go the route of freelancer. The flexibility that life ends up bringing you is tremendous. And this is potentially kind of a good way to play around with the idea. But yeah, the route of the contract is great. Also, a question came in that I'm afraid that we're going to jump over, and it's super important. And it's somebody had sent in a question about is a woman who had to leave her job to start a family, to adjust during the pandemic. It's related, right? Like there are reasons why we potentially got out of the way of working. I will say that I have, in my bubble, which is mostly enterprises, right? Like the in-house arms within enterprises, I have found that most cultures have been incredibly responsive to these stories, and that the overall, like, humanity has bubbled up in a way that I've never seen it ever. Like, you know, what used to be a lot of PR campaigns, which those still exist, don't get me wrong, but I see that companies are really living their statements these days when it comes to, like, being truly empathetic and understanding of stories. And I would say also, like, that those again, I'm a sucker for stories, but they capture you, and it does it brings more of the human into the conversation. So I would say, to speak to that person directly, contracting is a great route. Doing what Mauricio had mentioned earlier is, like, you know, case studies, though a lot of organizations and hiring managers are fairly allergic to case studies at this time. If executed right, it shows that you, like, have done your homework, and that's totally a good route to go. So I just want to directly answer this question. At DocuSign specifically, if you had left for family reasons, it was not a disadvantage whatsoever. And I think that that's fairly common in tech in general. So there is hope.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, no, thank you for responding to that question there. There was one other question that I thought was interesting regarding being a student designer, and then, you know, I think definitely after having left, graduating during a pandemic or after a pandemic, and then looking to get into a job. Money can be tight for a lot of different people, and some internships end up being unpaid. What are y'all's thoughts now entering into this post-COVID era of, is it worth it to take a 2, 3, 4 month, 6 month internship unpaid, or do you think companies should do a better job at paying their interns? Like, you know, what's your philosophy on that? I'd say, Mauricio, I'm curious if you have any thoughts in regards to that, since you work with a lot of different companies.
Man, I think that the short answer is yes. I think take those internships, with the caveat of, again, self-awareness of, I mean, is your light bill, you know, past due? Like, if you're needing money, then that's a different story. If you're wanting to gain experience and are interested in going down maybe a different path creatively, then I say, you know, go to that internship, provide some value, learn, be a sponge, be a student. So you know, it's a case-by-case basis, obviously, but in my mind, the internship is super valuable because both parties, in my mind, both parties win, unless you're in a financial situation where, you know, you need the funds to survive. That's a different story altogether. But I'd say generally take the internship.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that as well, because I just know from graduating and going into the workforce, I mean, the biggest education is going to be on-site training. And if you can get into these places and get the internship lined up, it's just going to give you that. I mean, if you can go through the 3-month period, the amount that you can soak in and take every advantage of that moment, like stay late, be there with the people, spend time with them outside of the office, all those things. Like, I mean, obviously not as much now, but virtually, however you want to do it, like those things are soak up as much information as you possibly can, because then the next stepping stone, you'll have gained all that knowledge that isn't necessarily always taught in school, because you're learning the hard skills, you're learning how to be a good designer, and now you have to learn how to work with the people. And as we talked about earlier, I think the you know, working with others and like conflict resolution, things like that, you can't really learn that as much in a classroom as you can on a job site, on a deadline, working towards a budget that's super tight, whatever it might be. So I think that's good insight. We're going to move into the next segment, which is going to be about just mistakes that job seekers make when applying for remote positions. And the first question I'd like to pose to everyone is, what are some just general patterns you see applicants make during the initial application process? So we, you know, talked really about the resumes and all that stuff, but what are some things beyond that you see applicants making consistently? And I think Alice and Elizabeth, you'd be good to speak on that, because you're working with these people day to day. Any things that stand out for you?
There we go. Am I unmuted? You know, I think it's just, again, like asking the questions, really understanding the opportunity, and, you know, simple things like time zones, you know, your team that you're going to be working with, like, where are they? I was working with a client a few weeks ago and they had someone in China, and we had an interview at almost 9 o'clock at night, right? For me, that was cool one time, but I'm like, dang, if I worked with that person, taking a call at 9 o'clock at night, is that something I'm willing to do multiple times a week? So understanding those things, because, you know, that could, if it's someone on your team, it may be a reality that you're going to need to do that. It can be tricky, like initially, right? You might not know that, right? You might not know that from the first interview, but, you know, I think we'll continue to see this evolve as more and more companies are open to working with people fully remotely. But understanding, you know, if there are times that you're going to need to travel to the corporate office, you know, if that's a thing, who pays for that? There's all sorts of little details that I think can easily like fall through the cracks. And if you know, take a little bit of time to think about those questions, and asking those up front is important. You know, even things as far as salary expectations go, right? You know, if you're interviewing for a, you know, position in New York, but you're sitting in Dallas, this is another thing that our conversations that we're talking about with clients and candidates too. How are companies, you know, is your salary going to be different than someone else's? You know, what are the taxes? You know, I was on a call the other day, and apparently some states, I didn't realize this, some states have different policies about rolling over your CTO. And so if you had a position in Texas and you're able to roll forward CTO days, but then get a position somewhere else, apparently that doesn't transfer. Don't quote me on this. I don't know the details, but, you know, I think we're all gonna, like, this conversation will continue to evolve for companies and candidates alike, because this is somewhat of like a new era for a lot of people, right? Although, you know, big companies, maybe DocuSign's been doing this for a while. They know, you know, the right way to make this happen. But if you have a question, ask it, you know, be clear and make sure you know what you're signing up for, so that you don't get into a situation that's not going to end up being the right place for you.
One thing I would add to that, that I see some candidates do, especially with there being so many remote positions now, and therefore so many more positions available to them, is just kind of like mass applications. And that's something I would steer clear of, just because like it can be really discouraging if you submit your resume to like, 500 places or whatever that looks like, and you don't hear back. So I would avoid that and instead, be very focused with where you're spending your time and applying to those positions and everything. And also, I think it's smart to keep a list, and doesn't have to be super fancy or anything like that, but just a list of, the positions you're applying to, what those roles are like, any feedback you receive or don't receive. And that way, if you're not receiving the callbacks that you want or anything, you can look back in like a week or two, like, okay, I got traction for these types of positions or this industry, maybe I should kind of dig more into there since I was getting some traction there. And you can just kind of adjust your search, and you have a little bit more like data that you're working with versus just like you're mass applying and don't really know where your resume is going or remember where you've applied to, that type of thing.
Something else that I think is interesting to ask is what the training looks like or onboarding. I think that's going to be a huge shift that companies have already had to make from like deploying their workforce to be remote last year during the pandemic. But, asking a company, if you guys are open to remote workers, is this something new that you guys have done? Like what's changed in your business and how you onboard candidates? Just because, it says a lot about a company when they have a really set process to make sure you're comfortable and getting you set up for success in a new position. And without that, especially remotely, that can be really challenging.
Do you think this is kind of just a more specific question, but do you feel that with remote and not being in the office, I mean, typically you have hardware in the office when you're coming in and stuff like that. When you're working from home, do you see more companies, like is there more of an expectation now to have like Adobe Creative Suite and all these different things, or should it be always across the board, like you have to have all these things? And how, like, what are some recommendations you'd have for people that, well, I guess just generally, I mean, what do you think on that? Like, should they just, I
From
mean,
like
should
a hard,
provide, yeah, like
computers or software provided?
software, different things like that, especially fresh out of school and stuff like that. Is that just an expectation across the board that that's going to be what you get?
So typically for full-time positions, when we're working with clients, they're going to provide the computer and any software. For contract to hire or contracts, it can vary. A lot of big companies are prepared, especially after last year, to be able to send computers to whether it's candidates picking them up locally or shipping them. But I would say, for contract positions, it's probably smart to have your own computer and license to some creative software. For a full-time position, I would think most companies are providing computers and software to their candidates. That's at least what I've seen recently. If you're interviewing for a full-time position, if they're not providing computers, and especially if you're an entry-level candidate, I don't think it's a bad thing to ask. Or if you don't have one, right? If they like you and they want you, they'll figure it out, is what I would say.
Yeah. Got a question about something interesting regarding networking, and just, working with online positions. Question is, how truly effective is it to apply to positions online? Is this a valid method of finding a job? I mean, it used to be networking in person, meeting people at these different things, but now that we're transitioning into this online everything kind of situation, how does that change? Like, what does that look like now? How do you approach those different ways of networking and connecting with different people in the digital space?
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's the only way that I know how, and it's the only tactic that has ever worked for me throughout my entire career. And yeah, for anyone who's converting a job through a website application, like congratulations, you have skills that I never have, and several of my friends didn't have, because the way that most of us have found jobs is through networking. And Brett, to address what you're saying directly, is gosh, I miss the conference, hallway bump-ins with random people as much as I think everybody does. But those still exist. There are lots of great communities out there. AIGA is a phenomenal example of what this looks like at scale, but more local, depending on your discipline. There's tons of stuff out there too. I encourage everyone just to get involved. ADP List is one where I'm jumping ahead a little bit, because I saw a question come in about, someone's not really converting with their interviews. Go check out ADP List. There are a lot of design leaders out there who are trying to figure out ways to help. There are mentorship programs that are cropping up all over the place. I'm sure AIGA Dallas Fort Worth in particular probably has some sort of pairing programs. These Slack groups are only as good as, the people that are in it. And you can find folks just by creating daily habits and getting involved into these online spaces and participate. There's no shortage of communities out there, and I certainly don't want to push people away from AIGA Dallas Fort Worth. So I won't name drop too many. But I will say for like design operations, there's the Design Ops Assembly. For conferences in general, Rosenfeld is a great organization to be mindful of, and you can go check them out right now. There's a bunch of online conferences coming up, and then DesignX. So these are all places where if you go in, there are thousands of people that are engaged on a monthly basis in these Slack communities with virtual events. And again, kind of bringing it back down to this region of Dallas Fort Worth, like this is, get more involved here. I imagine that there's places to connect with other folks and networking events, just like that were talked about at the beginning. So I would actually challenge that entire idea of like, you don't have to wait to expand your network. And people reach out blindly to me on LinkedIn all the time. If that's not something that you're doing, try it. The worst that can happen is somebody doesn't respond or says no, right? Like you should be out expanding your network online as much as possible, strategically, not just like with a random net. I would say fish with a spear. Figure out exactly the industries you want to work in, companies you want to work for, figure out who's in leadership positions there, find them on social, interact with them in the Slack groups online. It works. It really works. The guy that took over my job at the DLF found me through Twitter. So yeah, it's there. I know of more stories that turned into like lifelong friendships and jobs that way than I do the other way. So I can't speak to the online website world. I can speak to this other one. And I have a lot of stories I can point to that were successful conversions. So do that if you're not already.
Yeah, I agree with this. I mean, I think this is not necessarily networking, but it's a tool that you can use as, the partner of this talk is the creative group. You get in their system and they help place you, they help bring you some contract work. That's an easy, you've got people working for you, right, at this point. So there's lots of companies that do this. None as good as the creative group, let's be honest, but that would be a great way to kind of build, your chances of getting placed in a job that you want, because of the lack of networking that's happening now.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the questions that I was curious about, I was talking to some people that were doing applications through the internet, especially in the middle of the pandemic, that were finding jobs that may or may not be what they actually are. Like, I feel like it's easy to build a website, put up a job listing and stuff like that. And I've heard horror stories of people applying for things that aren't really what they're supposed to be. Have you guys seen any of that in the work that you've done? And if so, like, how do you kind of vet a job posting to see what they say it is and what could be something that's not, especially when you're like applying all over the world or all over the country? There's different things in different places. Like, have you seen that? And like, what are your thoughts in regards to that? Elizabeth or Allison, I'm curious y'all's perspective on that.
Something that we commonly see, or that I know Allison and my recruiters hear from candidates a lot, is that they're saying, I've been applying for this position, but I've never heard from anyone. Or, I've had clients admit to me that they maybe have a job posting up, but they're not really actively hiring for that role. That's a tough one, right? And, I've talked to clients about being careful about that, because it gives candidates a bad impression of that company, maybe, right? I don't think they're doing it maliciously, but they also maybe don't realize, how difficult it is for candidates when they don't hear back and they're submitting their resume in hopes of landing a role that maybe isn't really even open. So I hear about that somewhat frequently. Positions that are maybe posted and end up to be different, I don't hear about as often. But I don't know, I guess I would just say, like, I've heard about a lot of companies during the pandemic or as they're coming out of the pandemic, putting postings up to create almost like a pipeline of candidates, although they're not actively hiring. I think that's a bit of a bait and switch. And sometimes when you're not hearing back, that's potentially what's happening. It doesn't mean that your information is not getting to the, hiring managers or the HR team, but I can certainly understand from a candidate's perspective that that's, a disheartening way when you're really working hard to find a job. It was nice of Mauricio to say to partner with us, and there's other recruiting firms too, but we have a lot of really great relationships in the market. And kind of like what Adam said too, leverage your network. If you have applied for a position online or a posting, check your LinkedIn, see if you're connected with any of the hiring managers, even if it's like 2 or 3 people away. Don't hesitate to reach out and just try to get a personal connection to see if you can understand a little bit more about what's going on, or if that position's, open or available, or if they've filled it. It's another common thing that I run into is I'll talk to clients and say, oh, hey, I see you're hiring for a designer. I saw that posting on your website. And they'll say, oh, that's old. I need to take that down. So, I think being mindful of online postings, if you're not hearing something back, don't put all your eggs in one basket. But I think, like we've kind of all said, leveraging your network is probably the quickest way to get good information so that you don't feel like you're kind of putting yourself out there without getting a return.
Cool. If you could pick one thing regarding mistakes that you see when people are applying for positions, what would that thing be? What's one of the biggest mistakes that you see with people applying? Adam, you have any thoughts on that?
I don't have anything that's probably like unique or valuable here, and I'm looking at the clock. So if any of the other three do, please jump in.
No, cool.
Okay.
I know.
Go ahead, Allison.
It's just super quick. I know we kind of covered it earlier, but just, asking those questions of like, hey, what's the time zone like? Where's my team going to be and everything? Just so if you don't want to be at 8 or 9 p.m. calls every week, you don't end up doing that. I would say that's kind of my biggest advice there.
Cool. I want to ask a question from the audience and that came through here. Looking at social media, I know we talked a little about like Dribbble and Behance and all those different things, but one of the questions that came in here is regarding social media when applying to jobs. Like, which is the most important to you? What would you like to see? What do you not want to see? And how much do you typically research social media, and what mistakes do you commonly find in social media? Like, what are some things that people should be looking for in their personal platforms to make sure that they're not going to put themselves at risk, when it comes to applying?
I think this just goes back to kind of the stuff that we said earlier, right? It's like, is this something that generally somebody might be disappointed in, right? Like I came out of college when Facebook was just for universities, and you bet that like every one of my friends did not have any idea, like, or we didn't apply the foresight, right? But like there has to be a certain amount of hygiene in terms of how you interact everywhere, of course, but especially online. Everything's forever, right? Like this is all recorded. Not just this session, but like, interactions online. So I would say do a quick SEO test on yourself. Google your name, put it in quotes, leave it outside of quotes, but keywords that you think that people are going to, because that's what is happening on the other side for sure. I'm not sure if the question was actually from the standpoint of me as a hiring manager or me as a job seeker, but for both, I would just say like, do a Google test on yourself and check your SEO score. And just like if there's anything, and maybe too, if you have more savvy friends in this area, have them do it. Your friends will have no problem calling you out. So find a few trusted people that can be direct and give you some candid feedback, and just ask like, is there anything that stands out that maybe is a risk? Are there any flags anywhere? maybe you're too close to your own SEO to be able to answer that question.
I would definitely agree. I think a good test too is, especially from like a design or, if you're a copywriter, is your social media presence, or the things you're putting out on social media, if they're visible, if you choose to make them visible to everyone, is it going to add value or subtract value if someone were to see it, right? I think designers and, creatives have to be especially, in tune with themselves on this, because like I know I follow Mauricio on social media and he posts cool stuff, right? And so I'm like, wow, he does really cool things. And, I see that and it makes me know that he does cool things. But I'll admit, I am hiring on my team internally right now. And it surprises me what some people will put on social media out there for everybody, right? So I think the best, in addition to like if your mother or grandmother, would be, find it appropriate, especially if you're in a design position or a creative position. Is it adding value to you as a brand, like your personal brand, or would it subtract value? And maybe, just make it private. I think it's totally fair for people to have fun and, have their own social media accounts, but keep it for your private life, not your professional.
I totally agree. I mean, I think, the internet never forgets, right? And so it's, and you can actually see that in my Instagram page, how it's sort of transitioned from lifestyle stuff and me kind of like traveling and whatever, to really just mostly posting work. I just wanted to post design stuff. And so I think it's okay to showcase personality. I think that's actually a good thing. I think people want to understand sort of what you're into, what your interests are. But with a degree of editing, right? With a degree of like, you have to pepper some professionalism in there, because people are going to be looking at that stuff. They're going to be auditing all of it and scrutinizing it to understand who you are as a candidate and see if you're a good culture fit, or to, there's lots of reasons why people do this, because it's such easy access. And so Adam's point is great. Do a Google search on yourself. And I think what Elizabeth said is also super true. Just make sure that you're mindful of the stuff that you're posting, because it could make or break a situation for you, an opportunity for you.
Yeah, if I could add like a little bit more directedness from my rambling a second ago too, it's there is a generation right now that is so magnificent in so many ways of getting their thoughts out there and being part of movements. There's a question that came in of like, well, how much should I? Just remember, on the other side of whoever's hiring you, you are going to be a person, a human that there's a decision if we want to bring you into an organization to do our job functions, of course. And a lot of this is a lot of the entire conversation today is kind of within the boundaries of like, how strong will this person add value to the function that they're hiring for? What we haven't talked as much about is what happens when somebody comes in. The culture changes, right, to every single addition. And the smaller the team is, the more that every additional person here, is going to shape and impact and influence that culture. So if there's generally like toxic behavior that is out on social media, although it's nothing like bad necessarily, that's a very real thing that we're thinking about, is like, oh man, like what's this going to do? Right? They might be an incredible designer and we'll pass on them if it's clear that they're, swearing up a storm or like getting in Twitter fights over somewhat benign things. Because there's going to be, like we talked about earlier, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be hard decisions that we're going to have to make. There's definitely going to be disagreements. And we're all together going to have to move forward and eventually like be a team. At least here for this organization. And so how someone goes about debate is incredibly important. So if you're engaging online, just remember, like we're watching that too. And the way that you engage is everything. So to answer the question of like, well, should we include this or should we not in our portfolio? I don't think that activism has a place in a portfolio. That's just my perspective. But if you're engaging online, just be mindful of how you are engaging.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's got to be, some of this falls on a level of self-respect. Some of it falls on professionalism. Some of it. So you have to take all these things into account. You are being watched. You are being scrutinized. And I think it's important to to just understand that there's a certain level, a certain way that you need to carry yourself. Just be a good human, right? And if you're an activist, right, I think that's totally great, and be in those communities. Should it spill over into your professional life? I don't necessarily think so. I think that those things could be compartmentalized in different ways, but you need to be careful. You need to be willing to accept that the person on the other side is going to pass on you or not based on some of the stuff that you've got online.
And there are going to be companies that may hire you specifically because you're active, right? Like the famous Basecamp story that's out there right now. Like they made a decision to basically say, like, at our office, it is all about work, and we're not going to have a stance now on basically any major issues that are being talked about in the public forum. There are other organizations that are making money specifically to engage in change on a massive scale. So I would also say, like, we are just 4 data points on this call, and there are going to be certain organizations that index highly towards like just not having zero want or desire to bring any sort of political movement within their company context. And there's going to be other organizations that like they are all about it, right? So I'm not necessarily saying don't be yourself. I would just say, be yourself with a degree of decorum is all.
I think it all ties back into kind of what we've all said in different ways of just like the story of you and, what you want to be. And I think Adam mentioned it earlier of making like a pros and a cons list, or these are the things that are important to me, and realizing that, that may affect if a position or if a company is the right place for you. And if, being an activist or standing really strongly on one side or the other of something, if that's really important to you, then great. Just know that, for a company, maybe a different perspective is important to them. So it'll help you find the right place for you and somewhere that you'll be happy, right? The last thing you want to do is end up somewhere that's not going to be the right fit or place.
Yep, it's very true. Well, we're getting close to 8:30 here, so I am going to bring us down to the last section of the evening, which is going to be just the best advice that you would have to give to somebody to increase their chance of getting hired, regardless of what step of the process they are. If there's one thing that you feel strongly about to really elevate yourself, I'd like to just go around and ask each one of you that question individually and give me your perspective on that. So we'll start with Mauricio, if you don't mind sharing your thoughts there.
Sure. I mean, I think, man, it's a big question. It's an important question. I think be authentic, right? When it comes down to it, be authentic. Because I have run into several people that put a certain type of persona forward, and then we get them into the role, and they are nothing like that person that they portrayed. So just make sure that you're authentic. Make sure that they understand who they're getting as an employee and as a colleague, whatever you want to call it. But be authentic in your work, in what you're showing as far as your work, to be pulled into this role, and be authentic in your personality.
I like that. Elizabeth, what do you think?
The things that I had written down, which is similar to what Mauricio said, but be genuine, leverage your network. One thing that I sometimes have to remind myself or remind my team, sometimes my husband, is, don't forget, at the end of the day, like, work hard, put your best foot forward. And at the end of the day too, like, it's a job, right? You're getting paid for a reason. There are going to be things that aren't great. There's going to be hard days or hard situations that you need to work through, but there's always a learning lesson through those things. So I think that's something that's important to remember. And then for me, I'm like old school in the sense that I like love nothing more than sending snail mail. Unfortunately, sending like a follow-up thank you letter these days is like archaic and would probably take way too long to get to someone. But something that I've seen candidates that we work with do that I think is just really awesome, and again, going above and beyond, is creating a thank you note, even going a step beyond sending just a plain email. I'm working with a candidate right now who we actually just got a job yesterday. She was using, I think, Canva, or she is a designer. And so she was just creating like a personalized little note card. I think it was just a JPEG that we sent and we emailed to the hiring manager after each interview that she was involved in. So you know, that kind of goes back into just being genuine and being authentic. Like find little ways that you can add personal touches to the interview process, or just making yourself stand out is, I think, so important. Sorry, that was like 7 things, but you know.
Allison, what do you have?
Sure. So I would definitely agree with Elizabeth that like a thank you note goes a long way, and you would be surprised like how few thank you notes actually go out. So when you do write one, it can make a really big difference for you. So I would agree with that. But then also just sharing your ROI whenever you're able to. So, you know, whether that's the initial email introduction that as you send it over to the hiring manager, or again as during the interview. But then also like when you're actually in the interview, don't be afraid to ask what the next steps are, you know, like how many interviews there are, when you can expect to hear back, that type of thing. Because I think it's important for candidates to keep in mind that the interview process is just as much for them to figure out, you know, hey, is this company going to be a good match for me, and what should I expect next? And, you know, you're just as eligible to ask questions as the hiring manager is as well. So that'd be my advice there.
Yeah, definitely. I will say before I go off with Adam here, I did have a person I was interviewing at one point that I felt like asked more questions of us than they did us asking questions of them. And that 1,000 times over made a huge impact on us in interviewing that person. And I think that's a really, really key point to kind of keep in mind when you're going into that. Make sure you're overly prepared. I think that's really important. But anyway, Adam, I'm going to let you close us out here with your final thoughts.
Yeah, I will say too, just sometimes you sit on these events and not everyone has a strong perspective, but I would like just a firm +1 on every single thing that was just said here. If you fake it, it's going to end up coming out, right? If you're not prepared, is that just a waste of time? Potentially, at least. And being incredibly genuine. The thing that I'd like to add is 2 things. One is being strategic and highly intelligent in your search. Time is everything. And man, I just remember how exhausting it was to look for a job. And when you're like fishing with a net, it is so discouraging. I've mentored a few folks lately that they were saying that they've applied to hundreds of jobs. There was one person in particular who's like 557 job applications before she got it. And that just like, that is exhausting to think about, let alone do. So when I say intelligent search, what I mean is sit down if you're doing any kind of self-reflection and map out ideal industries that you may want to go work in, right? And be picky. Like, what are the things that you want to do by the end of your life in terms of change? Figure out which industries are going to put you in that position. Work backwards and understand, okay, great. What companies are standouts there? And then also, like, don't forget to look for small scale ups that maybe are unknown names. Go check out the Inc. 5000 list, and you can actually categorize based on industry. Look at awards, you know, like best places to work. Once you have this company name, work backwards from there, and you can find a lot of this stuff on LinkedIn just by keyword searches. Figure out who are the people that are working in the functions that you would like to eventually be one day, and just ask for like an informational. You'll be so surprised at how often that people respond. If you don't have a direct connection, ask for an introduction. I pressed this earlier. It's the only way that I know, and I've seen it convert many times for myself and my friends. So intelligent search for the win. Fish with a spear and not a net. The last thing I would say is like keep doing this stuff. Like go out and get involved with communities, grow your network. Linda said in the chat earlier that I just really want to print it out and put it up. Is that when you're growing your network, give more than you ask to get. It's a very small world. You'll find as the years go on, and it's super connected. So continue to give. And the last thing, if I could throw it out there, not to give you too much stuff to do, but keep reading. Like read a lot about stuff that you think that maybe your job may ask you to do. A lot of great free resources out there on designbetter.co in particular for some free books. All of those subjects are going to be relevant for what you're getting into, particularly the business to design book. So that's it.
Awesome. And with that, we're going to close out the slides. First off, I want to give a huge thanks to everybody here on the panel, Mauricio, Elizabeth, Allison, Adam. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been a huge pleasure. If anybody is interested in connecting, as we've talked about this evening, with any of these individuals, we do have their LinkedIn shared on the event posting. So if you want to go check out that event, you can go out there and connect and learn more. I'm going to get back to sharing my screen here so you can see our final slides. Also want to give a big shout out and thanks again to the Creative Group for helping sponsor and partner with us tonight. And in addition, as I'm making beeps here, I want to remind everybody about AIGA. We come in all shapes and sizes, so we aren't just for designers. We also include brand strategists, illustrators, coders, type designers, information architects. I myself am a coder as well, so there's a bunch of us here. We're not just specific to design, so if you're interested in AIGA and want to learn more, you can head over to our website, aigadfw.org, and find out all of those things. As we have here, we are trying to we have our shared purpose of creating a place where design thrives for everybody. So definitely check that out. And AIGA.org is our national website where you can learn all about the membership benefits and everything that comes in with the membership for AIGA. And you can also join our group if you're interested in volunteering. We are a volunteer-led organization across the country. So if you are interested in that, reach out to me. You can go to our website at AIGDFW and reach out to any of our board members and let us know if you're interested in getting involved in any of our committees. We would love to have you help, and you get some cool perks as well. So it's always fun to like meet people and do all the different things behind the scenes to make these events happen. And we have a great team that helps us do that. And before we close out, I want to mention that we do have our next event. It's again a virtual event. It's the Deck Kickoff Party. This is our annual community project that we do that features about 50-ish designers from all throughout DFW that design a card and participate. And this is the place to go to get signed up and get a card that you can have inside of a printed deck that you will get by participating. It's a really, really cool project, and it's a great way to just, part of the networking process, getting your name out there, getting your work out there amongst people. This is on June 17th at 6:30 p.m. Central. And thank you very much. And again, thank you to all of our panelists here. It's been awesome. And if you'll have any questions, you can always reach out to us on our website, and have a great night. We'll see you at the next event.
Great job, Brett. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks, guys. Great to meet everybody.
Likewise. Have a good night.
Bye, y'all.
Take care.